Is the Biden administration trying to set the world on fire before it leaves office next month? That's the question that some of us are asking in light of recent developments in Syria, Georgia, and South Korea. This is Dimitri Lascaris for Reason to Resist, and to explore this question, I've welcomed onto the program Larry Johnson. Larry is a former CIA officer. He was Deputy Director of the U.S. State Department Office of Counterterrorism from 1989 to 1993. Larry now heads the consulting firm Berg Associates. He is a co-founder of the wonderful Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity and writes extensively about geopolitics and military matters on his website, Sonar 21. Thank you very much for joining me today, Larry.
Man, I'm going to have to copy that introduction. That's better than what I could do for myself.
I doubt that, but I appreciate the kind remarks. So, Larry, beginning of 2023, Emmanuel Todd, an anthropologist who is one of France's leading intellectuals, declared that World War III had begun.
Yeah.
And he argued that contrary to the prevailing idea that Russia has more to lose in the Ukraine war than its Western opponents, the West too has entered into what it regards, or at least the Western leadership regards, as an existential conflict. And he wrote specifically the following: "It's obvious that the Ukraine conflict, which started as a limited territorial war and escalated to a global economic confrontation between the whole of the West on the one hand and Russia and China on the other hand, has become a world war." And of course, Todd expressed that view before the genocide began in Gaza, before the Axis of Resistance went to war with Israel, and before the unrest we're now seeing in Georgia and South Korea. In your view, is it fair to describe what is happening now as a world war, and if so, why?
Yeah, it is the breakup of, let's call it, the colonial empires that have dominated, ruled the world since, the 14th century. Or the early 15th century. So, we're talking over coming up on almost 600 years of domination, exploitation. And, the United States has been the last actor inserted into this global drama. And going back to the end of World War II, when the United States emerged as the de facto leader of this colonial empire, and became sort of a proxy for Europe, and particularly the United Kingdom, but had the added advantage that the dollar became ultimately the reserve currency in the 1970s, thanks to the actions of Richard Nixon. So, money is power, as the saying goes, and the United States had a dominant role. The start of this turning was with the collapse, the implosion of the Soviet Union in 1991. The United States had a chance where it could have, reimagined the words of Abraham Lincoln at the end of the Civil War, where Lincoln in his final inaugural address spoke and said, "With malice towards none, with charity for all." And he talked about not holding grudges and trying to rebuild. The United States could have embraced Russia at that point, but didn't. And it embarked instead on a campaign to basically destroy Russia, dismantle it, rob it of its resources. And so this entire, we're looking now 33 years ago. The last 33 years have been dominated by this Western fixation with taking over, destroying and dismantling Russia and China. And it is, it's always couched in terms of, used to be, you're barely old enough to remember the Cold War, but, I was a true child of it. And, throughout that entire period, we were talking, we got to fear international communism. We've got to stop those commies or to take over the world. And so that was the orientation. Well, when communism went away, what did we fight? Well, they tried that global war on terrorism for a while. That became a good excuse and was able to pump some more billions of dollars into the defense industries. But even that went away because the terrorists were not that much of a threat. But so then the focus is returned to how do we get Russia and China? And so to that extent, this, the war really, I think, started back in 2014 with the Maidan and the overthrow of the government in Ukraine. The West then trying to create this proxy in Ukraine. And look, it didn't just start in 2014. When you go back and look at the United States and NATO conducting annual military exercises with Ukraine, those started in earnest in 2008. Now, imagine how the United States would react if Russia or China had gone to Mexico, 15, 16 years ago, and started conducting annual military exercises right on the border of the United States, where you had Russian troops practicing amphibious landings on the shores of Matamoros, Mexico, which is just across the border from Brownsville, Texas, on the Caribbean side. Do you think we would have been concerned? Bet your ass we would have been concerned.
Mm-hmm.
We would have viewed that as a threat. Yet that's what the United States has been doing for the last 16 years. And Russia, with and particularly under Putin's leadership, with an incredible amount of patience, has just, they've been constantly getting the finger poked in their chest, and they've taken it. And, the movement into Ukraine in 2022 was their final throwdown, saying, okay, we're not going to take this anymore. This is going to stop. So, yeah. We're in World War III. We just, so far, the United States hasn't paid a price in terms of blood, but it will, I'm afraid.
We just saw, in fact, how the United States government reacts when it perceives threats on its borders. Trump basically to wreck the Canadian and Mexican economies because of migrants entering from Mexico and Canada. And of course, the Mexican and Canadian governments quickly capitulated to his demands. In any event, I want to focus now, Larry, on Syria in particular, and then move on to other hot zones. On your website, Sonar 21, you published an article recently that was titled "Follow the Oil Money in Syria." And in it, you analyzed a couple of competing plans for oil pipelines in the region. Could you talk to us about those competing pipeline plans and how they might be influencing the actions of Turkey and others in Syria?
Yeah, I was raising what could be one of many explanations for what's going on right now. And I don't want to suggest that these are each mutually exclusive. All of them can be true. But one of the elements that's there is there are competing proposals for pipelines, one that starts in Qatar and then snakes its way through Saudi Arabia, then through Jordan, through Syria, and into Turkey, with the terminus in Turkey, which means, hey, if that pipeline goes through, Turkey's going to be, king of the world. There'll be you won't have to worry about loading up oil in the Persian Gulf, shipping it through the Red Sea so the Houthis can blow it up. It can go straight to Turkey through the pipeline. And, that's a lot of potential financial interest for Turkey, which gives Turkey further incentive to try to wrest control of Syria from the government of Bashar al-Assad. The other plan is that a pipeline that originates in Iran, goes through Iraq, goes through Syria, and boom, Syria all of a sudden becomes a major player. So if you don't think that has aroused the interest both of the United States and Europe and Turkey, I do have a bridge to sell you. So, that's one of the elements. Right. But, let's recognize that this animus towards Syria, good God, it goes back. I was listening to Chas Friedman, and he correctly reminded us, this goes back to the days of Eisenhower. Okay? We're talking 70 years that the United States has been engaged in efforts to overthrow the government of Syria. And in most cases, I think what the United States is doing is pursuing a policy that's going to be conducive to Israel and to the Zionist cause. But the most recent activity started back in 2011 under Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State. And so they got in bed with the United Kingdom and with Turkey and decided that now was the time to push to get rid of Bashar al-Assad. And notice back then they were able to enlist the Arab countries And in fact, the Arab nations united and they threw Syria out of the Organization of Arab States or whatever it was called. They were made pariahs in the Organization of Islamic Countries, the OIC, and they started a full-scale insurgency, guerrilla war, insurrection, call it what you will. Now, the United States and the United Kingdom both were actively involved in providing the weapons that were going to Turkey that were then being delivered into the hands of radical Sunni Islamists, Salafists. And I want to draw the distinction for many in the West because too often they lump all Islamic terrorism as one big ball, the same thing. They equate Hamas and Hezbollah with the likes of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and they couldn't be more distinct. In fact, what most people in the West don't appreciate is that Hezbollah has been one of the leading fighters in Syria against those radical Islamists, the Sunnis, the Salafists, the Takfiris, that they believe that their vision of Islam is one that they subject the entire world to. You must become the Muslim that they are, or you will die. These Salafists, their heritage, they come out of, the family tree comes out of Al-Qaeda and the attacks on 9/11. So think about this. The United States, who claimed that its global war on terrorism was to stop this radical Islamic threat, is arming the bastards, training them, providing them money, and fighting against the Syrian army, fighting against Hezbollah, who are trying to destroy those Muslim extremists. And how extreme are they? They're so extreme that the initial sort of founder of ISIS, Zarqawi, he got a letter of complaint from Al-Qaeda, from Osama bin Laden and Ayman Zawahiri, who were saying, hey, basically, dude, what are you doing killing all these Shia Muslims? Stop it. Stop it. We're Muslims. You don't need to attack other Muslims. Not him, man. Those Shia had to go. Right. So here's the United States in 2011 sets up this base, CIA base in Benghazi. Purpose of that base, to process weapons that are then being transferred into Turkey, then onward to these guerrillas. The United Kingdom was actively involved then, too, in helping collect those weapons. And I got firsthand evidence of this. It was completely accidental. But one of my CIA buddies retired. He used to be in charge. He was the administrative chief of the non-official cover program. The non-official cover program means you hire someone into the CIA, but you never acknowledge that they're CIA. They'll always be presented as if they work for some corporation, either a U.S. or foreign corporation. They'll never be acknowledged, but they're actually deeply undercover. And so my friend lives in California, and one day his wife, who's a hairdresser, came in and said, hey, I got this customer, and she's got this husband who's got some tax issues, and he needs some help, and he says he works with a top secret program. So my friend Mike said, all right, have him come see me. So the guy shows up, and it turns out this guy had been a member of the 75th Ranger Regiment, which is U.S. Special Operations Forces unit, considered Tier 2, Level 2. And he got booted because he'd had some negligent firearms handling. But he comes in and he sits down with my buddy Mike. Now, remember, Mike had been the admin chief. He was the guy that hired and processed the paperwork and got people, took care of getting them undercover so that they had a real solid back cover. Guy sits down and goes, yes, I'm a non-official cover officer for the CIA. And Mike goes, really? Do tell. Explain it to me. Oh, that's interesting. And gets the guy explaining. Well, it turns out the Brits, our friends, our cousins, they recruited this guy and convinced him that they were the CIA and that he was working for the CIA. And his job, he was sent to Tripoli, and his job was to collect surface-to-air missiles that were out on the black market, buy them up, then hand them off to a cutout who delivered them to the Benghazi base, and then they were being shipped forward into Syria. So what we're talking about, this goes back to 2011, 2012. Now, why did they want to get rid of Assad? The basic reason is they saw Assad in terms of his alliance with Iran being a pipeline and network to Hezbollah.
Mm-hmm.
And Israel wanted to defeat Hezbollah. We wanted to defeat Hezbollah because, by God, you can't have Hezbollah wanting to ensure the rights of the Palestinian people. That just can't be allowed. They've got to recognize that they are not entitled to that land because they didn't write the Old Testament. If they had written the Old Testament, they could have written themselves in, hey, God promised this land to me. But hey, since we, the Jews, wrote that book, surprise, surprise, we get the star in it. We're the heroes. We get the land. So yeah, that's why they started it.
Sorry, you started out by saying, because I thought this was very important, that the Gulf states at that time, when this monstrous war was ignited, were very anti-Assad.
Oh yeah, Arab League they booted him. Arab League, hey, out of here.
I understand their attitude now appears to be quite different. Could you explain what their attitude appears to be and why you think there's been this change?
Yeah, I use a crude example, but it's like the parents in the neighborhood who thought that the Mr. Rogers school teacher was just a very kind man. They found out he's a pedophile. And they found out the United States is this marauding influence that doesn't have their best interests at heart at all. Mm-hmm. And they've watched, they saw that they were used, that the United States had no interest in building peace and prosperity and security for them. As far as the United States is concerned, all those countries are just pieces of toilet paper that the United States is waiting to wipe its ass with when it becomes convenient. I mean, it's crude, but it's unfortunately, it tells the truth.
I totally agree. I totally agree. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, but so in 2014, you get the Maidan in Kiev, in Ukraine, the overthrow of this government, and then the attempt and the continued attempt of the United States to boot Assad. And finally, Russia wakes the hell up and goes, oh, wait a second. We don't think the West is our friend. And the government of Syria requests, begs Vladimir Putin, come help us. Putin responds, and that's when the war starts turning around. The U.S. hopes of dethroning Bashar al-Assad go down the toilet. Mm-hmm. Then, as the situation starts to stabilize, the West, the United States in particular, basically occupies the western third of Syria because we want the oil. I mean, we're in complete violation of international law. We establish an outpost there as if we get to have a right to it, and we have no right whatsoever to be there. But again, we continue to do it. Now, the Turkey's relationship with Syria is long and complicated. I mean, it goes back into the Ottoman Empire, and there was a period there was Syria was actively supporting the PKK, the Kurdish Workers' Party, the terrorism arm of that, who was carrying out terrorist attacks in Turkey. I'll note that Greece was a major sponsor of the PKK, but that's another subject. So, they haven't always had good relations, and Turkey is quite willing to do what it could to disrupt. Okay, so let's jump ahead now. And now that on the very day that Israel and Lebanon declare the ceasefire, shortly thereafter, this Hayat al-Tahrir al-Sham launches this offensive. Well, they've got Ukrainian officers with them. That's the first tell. Ukrainian military officers don't have their own independent foreign policy. They're operating under the direction of the United Kingdom and the United States. They didn't get there on their own. They didn't go out and just have their own Air Force fly them. They were transported down there by U.S. and British assets, I am certain. And then they bring technology and they bring leadership. They bring drones, drone operators. This is part of a coordinated Western effort to do two things: to try to divert Russian resources. Their Kursk venture failed, so this is Kursk 2.0, only in Syria, to try to get Russian resources diverted. That again, the West is so damn ignorant; they don't understand that Russia's got a 1.5 million man army. They've got sufficient depth that they can divert personnel there and their assets, and it doesn't weaken them at all in Ukraine.
Mhm.
But part of it was a diversion. Part of it is an intent to, again, overthrow Syria if they can, because they ultimately want to weaken Iran, and they want to stop the flow of weapons into Hezbollah. And so Israel, from that standpoint, Israel's joined in. Turkey has its own interests. It sees this as a chance to capture more territory. Made a mistake, though. I mean, it's got, in this case, in contrast to what happened in 2011, 2012, Arab League came out immediately and said, screw you. We're with Syria. We're standing with Syria. China, we're standing with Syria. Russia definitely standing with Syria. So all of a sudden, Turkey is looking around going, where'd everybody go? I thought we'd have a world cheering us along. Not happening this time. And they can, Recep Tayyip Erdogan is not a complete dummy. I mean, he's a scoundrel, and he's a nefarious, scheming bastard, in my view. But he also is smart enough to recognize this war is not going well for Ukraine, and they're not going to be long for this world. And he definitely doesn't want to get himself aligned on the wrong side of history, which means tie himself to the United States to go down with their ship. So
you actually wrote on December 1st that you thought at that point that Turkey was overplaying its hand. It sounds like you continue to be of that view.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is they're getting visits from Iran. They're getting visits from Lavrov, Foreign Minister Lavrov of Fidan. And what's interesting is at least what the Foreign Minister Fidan for Turkey says in public is, I don't know nothing about birth and no babies. We don't have, where did this come from? My God, this is terrible. Yeah.
We had nothing to do with it. Yeah. So yesterday, Larry, December 3rd, Russia engaged in a rather impressive display of missile technology in the Eastern Mediterranean. Can you tell us what we know about this? I mean, they did it quite publicly. What do you make of all of this? What were they trying to get across to the West? There was obviously a message there.
Yeah, no, they're just trying. They're clearly trying to show the West, when that skunk, that white tail down, when it raises its tail, that's usually a sign it's something bad is getting ready to happen. Stay away. That's what the Russians did yesterday. They show these vertically launched hypersonic missiles that they get launched up like this, and man, then they do a 90-degree take off. Because and the fact that they conducted that in the Mediterranean, that they're letting the West know, hey, you don't own this. We have a say. And the United States is basically we're a military force that relies upon sea power, naval power, most likely our surface fleet, but we also have the submarines, and then air power. Well, the whole power of the U.S. surface fleet has been called into question over the last 12 months since the announcement of Operation Prosperity Guardian in the Red Sea, that we were going to stop those Houthis. We'll teach those Houthis, those sandal-wearing, curved knife, desert dwellers, how dare they come up against the mighty United States? Well, 12 months later, the United States can't stop them. The Houthis keep driving U.S. aircraft carriers out of the Red Sea. Two U.S. destroyers the other day were busy fending off about 8 missiles fired at them. Apparently none of them hit, but it's like as those destroyers are firing missiles off to protect themselves, understand they don't have an automatic, it's not like the children of Israel in the desert with manna. They wake up every morning and go, oh, hey, new missiles, just put those in. No. Once they fire them off, they're depleting what they have. They'll then have to sell out, go to another port, because some genius at the Pentagon, when they first ordered this particular kind of air defense system, they used to be able to reload at sea. They'd have a ship come up alongside and carry, transfer the missiles. Oh, no, no, no. They now have to sail to a port somewhere and where a big old crane has to do it because they can no longer do it the other way, which is cheaper
Right.
and more efficient. Yeah, that's the mighty U.S. Navy.
Right.
So, the Russians right now are just sending a very clear message. Don't mess with us. Well, they have drawn effectively a line in the sand and putting NATO on notice. Russia's prepared to retaliate on the maritime front, on the ballistic missile front in particular, way ahead, light years ahead of the United States and Europe.
Right.
So
I'm curious about your thoughts with respect to Russia's attitude towards Israel, because I think the working assumption on the Russian side is going to be that this is, at least in part, intended to benefit Israel and that Israel is somehow involved in all of this. Russia, although rhetorically, if you listen, for example, to the statements of its ambassador to the United Nations, he has been quite critical of Israel's actions in Gaza and in Lebanon. But Russia doesn't seem to have done more than give moral support to the axis of resistance. Maybe it's given some, military equipment, air defense systems, electronic warfare systems to Iran,
right,
and so forth. But it doesn't seem to have been really engaged in assisting Hezbollah or the Syrian military to resist attacks by Israel. Do you think that there might be some payback here for Israel from the Russian perspective, that Russia might decide it's going to become more active in supporting Hezbollah and the Syrian government in their conflict with Israel?
Yeah, well, potentially. Here's the other dynamic that's at work here. Between 1.5, I've heard different numbers, so I don't have the precise, but between 1.5 and 2.5 million Israeli citizens are also citizens of Russia. They hold Russian passports. How many of those do you think might possibly be working for Mossad or Shin Bet or in the Israeli Defense Force? So how many of those do you think may have been recruited by Russian intelligence to work for Russia and provide Russia information on what's going on? So I think Russia plays a much smarter long game. The Russian game is chess. The American game is whack-a-mole.
Mm-hmm.
So when you put chess up against whack-a-mole, I think chess wins every time in terms of being able to think 2 or 3 moves ahead. And so to that extent, I think Russia's keeping tabs and maybe even trying to help steer some of the activities.
Mm-hmm.
Because, when you step back and objectively look at what's happening to Israel, despite what I call the Zionist delusion that, Israel's the mightiest military in the Middle East. I go, really? They've been fighting basically an Hamas who doesn't have an army, doesn't have an air force, doesn't have a navy. They don't have tanks. They don't have artillery. And yet those lightly armed terrorists have been able to fight you to a standstill after 14 months. So I'd step back and reevaluate my claim about my military prowess. Okay? That's for starters. So within that, I think Russia's dealings with Israel are being done indirectly through Iran. And, I don't see Russia necessarily wanting to get itself too embroiled in Israel's affairs, just simply from the fact, it still has obligations towards those 1.5 million. Now, how many of those have stuck around? Or how many have decided, screw this, I'm going back to Russia. It's maybe a little colder, but by God, it's a lot more peaceful in places like Moscow and St. Petersburg.
Yeah, I would have thought that's a much more attractive option at this stage. But
yeah. Hey, I've been there. I've been to Moscow twice in the last year and St. Petersburg once. Tell you what, I was in New York City in August of 2019. What a nightmare that was. So, I mean, when you see these major cities that are clean, safe, uh, that, you can really enjoy yourself, great food, great people. Russia's remade itself. It's risen from the ashes. That's
Yeah.
that's sort of what gives me hope for, the potential for the United States in the West,
Mhm.
that it can go through a rebirth just as Russia has. But sometimes you have to, like a drug addict, you have to go crash and come to the realization, hey, I can't keep living like this. Got to turn it around.
Yeah. I was in Russia for the first time in the middle of last year, and I had the same impression, Larry. I can't think of a single major Western city, and I visited quite a few of them in my lifetime, that today is in as good a shape as what I saw in
And
Moscow.
how many police did you see on the street?
Almost none.
Yeah, I kept looking around and said, because I've got some training in surveillance, counter surveillance.
Yeah, and this isn't a time of war. You would
Yeah.
expect the city to be heavily policed.
Well, yeah, particularly a foreigner, you'd think, man, they're going to keep an eye on me.
Yeah.
But I was, I kept checking. I didn't pick up any surveillance at all. Now I know the Russians are good, but I don't think they're that good.
Yeah.
Because like I said, I've done training on this, and it was just this concept that it's a police state, it's an authoritarian state. No, it's a traffic jam. The funniest thing was I got picked up one day by this taxi driver. He's Georgian, and he's got a CD-ROM playing, but the video, you see the video, it's the three tenors, Pavarotti, and this cab driver, he starts singing Italian opera to me the entire drive. It's like a 40-minute drive back to the hotel, and he's singing, and he had a good voice.
You're going to see that in New York City, I would
Oh,
imagine.
man, this is wild, just wild.
So before we leave the region of West Asia, I wanted to talk to you about the ceasefire in Lebanon.
Hmm.
As I'm sure you're aware, there have been many reports of Israeli violations of the ceasefire.
Yeah,
I saw one, I think it was in CNN 2 days ago, where they estimated the number of Israeli violations was in excess of 100.
yeah,
Uh, Now, when this thing was announced, the day before it actually went into effect, what I was reading in the press was that Lebanon had agreed, and apparently with the acquiescence of Hezbollah, that any ceasefire violations were going to be adjudicated by a committee. And the U.S. was going to chair that committee.
yeah.
And as far as I know, the only other member is its little vassal, France, its yapping French poodle. So this really flummoxed me, because I thought, surely Hezbollah understands that it's not going to get a fair shake from this committee, that they are going to undoubtedly give Israel a huge amount of leeway to violate the ceasefire. And it appears that that's what they've done. Apparently, the U.S. government today, along with the French government, has issued some kind of a vague warning to Israel, but there's really been no consequence. So I was mystified about why Hezbollah would agree to this. Why would they agree that their enemies, because that's what they are, the governments of the United States and France, would adjudicate these disputes? Do you have any idea why they might have agreed to that?
Well, I think that, it goes back to the nature of the relationship that Hezbollah has with the other factions in Lebanon, with Amal, with Nabi Berri's group. And, I think it was actually sort of a gesture on Hezbollah. Hezbollah would have said, okay, look, you can't trust these bastards, but you want to trust them? Okay, we'll play along with you. And because Hezbollah will use that time to rebuild, restock some of its weapons, give its fighters a rest. The story among the Zionists is, oh, we defeated Hezbollah. Okay, keep telling yourselves that. You didn't push them back north of the Litani River as you claimed you were going to. Once again, it's just a repeat of 2006. But, Hezbollah is able to, I think, use this more to, if you will, secure the moral high ground. That at least they can argue and show the rest of the world the growing influence of the global South, we're not the ones violating the ceasefire. It's repeatedly Israel. We're not the ones targeting women and children. That's Israel. Hezbollah attacks military targets almost exclusively. And, it gets back to this entire false charge, this canard that Iran is the number one sponsor of terrorism. Why? Well, because of all the, quote, terrorist attacks carried out by Hezbollah and Hamas, except when you total up those so-called terrorist attacks, the vast majority of them against military figures. And you know what? I found that there's a specific word to describe attacks by armed groups against military personnel. It's a three-letter word. It's called war. Okay?
Right.
Not terrorism. It's war.
Right.
So,
and the Israeli media systematically characterizes attacks on its military personnel as terrorism. And the West adopts this interpretation.
Well, in fact, this about 6 months ago, 7 months ago, I kept, I've considered myself a terrorism expert. That was basically because I could spell and pronounce Idmagmunia, back in the day. But I kept hearing this about Hamas, and I thought, if you put a gun to my head and said, hey, write down the list of Hamas terrorist attacks, their top 10 hits, I couldn't do it. So I started searching. And I came across the Israeli Foreign Ministry has a website in which they've published every Palestinian attack on Israelis or foreigners, terrorist attacks, since August of 2000. So I found one of the readers of my blog at Sonar 21 put this all into a spreadsheet for me. We were able to break it down and analyze it. I was shocked because out of, say, 850 terrorist attacks over this 24-year time frame, at most 105 implicated Hamas. And as we discussed, they were not walking into a crowded cafe setting off a suicide bomber. These were attacks on military personnel or settlers who were attacking Palestinians on their land.
Right.
So all of a sudden, it's a completely different picture. And then I went back and started looking at the Bureau of Counterterrorism at State Department, because every year they're mandated by law to publish country reports on terrorism. And the last one they came out with was in 2022. It was published in 2023, but it covers the events of 2022. And they have a statistical appendix. So I went to that statistical appendix and looked up. They got the top 10 terrorist groups. And all these groups, man, they committed like 500 and to maybe the lowest was like 300 terrorist attacks in a year. Well, hell, that's almost as that's 3 times the number that Hamas committed over a 24-year period. Okay, that was 1 year. And when you look at their top 10 groups, not a single one is sponsored by Iran, funded by Iran, trained by Iran. So you ask the logical question. How can Iran be the number one sponsor of international terrorism when none of the groups that are carrying out the terrorist attacks are sponsored by Iran? Moreover, let's just go back over the last 24 years, or 23 years since 9/11. The vast majority of terrorist attacks against the West have been perpetrated by ISIS, Sunni groups, Salafist groups, groups that have no connection with Hezbollah or Hamas at all, and no connection with Iran. That's where the terrorism that attacking Western interests have come from. But yet this big lie has continued to push in order to justify attacking Iran. But if you objectively step back and look at it, the West has been funding terrorist attacks against Iran. And say, well, what's terrorism? I'll give you Bibi Netanyahu's definition. Bibi used this definition with William F. Buckley in an interview in 1986. And he said, terrorism is violence against civilians for political purposes. I go, damn, I agree with that. That's a good definition. Mm-hmm. So what has the United States been doing? The United States has now been providing funding and training to the Mujahideen al-Haq, the MEK, which we used to list as a terrorist group until we decided, well, since they're only going to attack Iranians, we don't care. That's okay. It's not terrorism anymore because they're hitting one of our enemies. Going, oh, that's how this game's played. And assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists by groups that were funded by Western intelligence. So it's not like Iran has been sitting there as a seething, raging lion, lashing out, eating women and children.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's really been the opposite. And so that takes us all the way back to this mess in Turkey. Here is the United States now basically fighting on the side of radical Islamic terrorists that have been responsible for most of the terrorism in the first quarter of the 21st century. That's why the rest of the world looks at the United States and says, you guys are not any kind. Why do we even trust you? Why do we even listen to you? And I think that's one of the reasons you saw the Arab League come out so quickly and say, hey, we're with Syria. We're not with the United States. We're not with Turkey. We're not with Israel. We're with Syria.
This really raises an important theoretical question. You're absolutely the right person for me to put this question to. So you talked about Bibi's definition of terrorism.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you'll hear a slightly modified version of that. It's not just for political purposes, but also religious or ideological purposes. Yeah. Throw that into hopper. But whichever of those definitions you adopt. Here in Canada, recently, the Canadian government was pressured by the Israel lobby to designate an organization called Samidoun as a terrorist entity. And Samidoun, basically, it regards itself as a civil liberties or human rights organization, and its primary purpose was to advocate for the rights of Palestinian prisoners. So when this happened, when the Canadian government did this, it capitulated to the pressure of the Zionist lobby. A group that is very concerned with civil liberties, it's called the International Civil Liberties Monitoring Group, came out with a scathing denunciation of what Canada had done and said, interestingly, that really we should just get rid of this whole system of designating certain entities as terrorism because it makes no sense and it's discriminatory and so forth. And I started thinking about this and I thought, just a basic question which I hadn't contemplated before. Let's take two hypotheticals. In one hypothetical, somebody kills somebody for money. Okay. And let's assume the person who does the killing has money. They don't need the money. They just want more. So they kill some schmuck who's walking down the street and happens to have, a wallet full of cash, takes the money and runs off. Now let's take somebody else who kills somebody. Again, some poor schmuck, didn't do anything to him. But the reason for this is that person belongs to a population whose government is oppressing them brutally. And so out of anger and rage, they kill that person. What I don't understand, they want to do it, and they're thinking to themselves, this is a way for me to liberate my people by inflicting pain on the other side, even if it's civilians that I have to target. Why do we as a society think it's worse for somebody to kill for a political or ideological or religious motive than, for example, somebody who kills just out of crass greed? I don't really, do you know what the answer to that question is?
Well, not really. Let me just say, I come from a long line of terrorists. Okay, I'm a son of the New American Revolution, so I'm actually a member of the organization Sons of the American Revolution. I have at least 28 ancestors who fought, most as militia, in the American Revolution in 1776 against the Brits. If we took the definitions used today in the United States, like in the Patriot Act, every single one of my ancestors would be classified as a terrorist, as an insurrectionist, because they were overthrowing unjust power. And what fascinates me now is how the United States has so divorced itself from its founding its creation story. Because if we were true to our creation story, we would be about helping people liberate themselves from tyranny, helping people liberate themselves from foreign rulers. And but instead, the United States has become an enabler of colonialism. The war in Vietnam. What was that about? It was trying to help preserve the French colonial empire, not just in Vietnam and Cambodia, throughout, you know, the very fact that France at one time thought it owned that territory, that they had control, it was theirs, and the people living there were somehow subject to French rule. And here's the United States enabling that. The same with the Brits. We were upholding that. And then we sort of come into our own empire where now, by God, you do what we say, or we'll launch a color revolution against you, a la Georgia, or we will subvert you through covert action of some form or another, or we will impose sanctions on you, economic sanctions. That'll teach you. Or we'll go to war with you. We'll invade, we'll bring our troops in, we'll kill your people. Then we'll leave and we won't say we're sorry, and we will have accomplished nothing other than pissing you off.
Right.
That's what the United States has become. Right. And people say, well, why do you hate America? I love the concept of what America was supposed to be. I hate what it has become, what it's doing, because instead of promoting genuine justice, genuine freedom, we end up becoming enablers of these very powerful moneyed interests that are. That's what I say. This is really all about the money when all is said and done. Right. That's what Ukraine is about. Get our hands not only on those natural resources, but use Ukraine as a springboard to destroy Russia. So we can get control of all of Russia's natural resources. That, the West has become like a bunch of ravenous locusts.
Hear, hear. So you mentioned Georgia in responding to my question. Mm-hmm. I don't think the West is even being shy about its efforts to.
We stop pretending. Oh, look at that! Look at that organic uprising of the people. We must support that. Oh, hell no, man! We're in there full.
Yeah, I think the president. Is actually the president of Georgia, who's creating all this mess for contributing to it. Is a French national, I believe. She was born.
She was a French diplomat.
Right. God.
Yeah,
so I'm not going to waste your time by asking you whether you think the Americans are involved in all of this and the Western Europeans and so forth. I think that's quite clear.
No.
What's your assessment of how that's going? Do you think that project stands any chance, that color revolution stands any chance of success, or do you think it's under control?
No, I think it's under control because the prime minister, he understands exactly what's going on. The notion that the Europeans, the United States wanted to punish Georgia for passing a law that required the registration of foreign agents trying to influence politics in Georgia. We got that law here in the United States.
And we just adopted it in Canada.
Yeah, as it should be. But see, the reason the United States hates that is because since the creation of my old outfit, the Central Intelligence Agency, the Central Intelligence Agency's covert actions around the world number in the thousands, if not tens of thousands, where we consistently meddle in the internal affairs of other countries, up to and including launching coups, replacing leadership, assassination plots, you name it, we've done it. And so we feel that we're entitled to continue to do that regardless. What's fascinating is we often like to portray the Russians as the real bad guys on that front. And I'm not saying Russia never has tried to meddle or influence events in other countries, but they don't do it at the scale the United States does. Not at all. I mean, look at the NGOs that still can operate in Russia, while the United States has a complete ban on any NGO in any way, anything affiliated with Russia in the United States. Okay, hell, their RT, their television network, which has some government funding. But, I've said this repeatedly. I first said it on CNN, like, oh, good God, 7 years ago, that, I used to be a pretty ubiquitous pundit, talking head on television. I was a Fox News analyst. I was on ABC, CBS, NBC, PBS, Public News. I was on CBC up in Canada. I was on BBC. I did them all. I admit it. I was a media whore. And
You're on CBC. That's amazing. I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, and all of them, when they call you up, say, "Hey, Mr. Johnson, we'd like to have you on this program." Okay, we need to do a pre-interview. Oh, pre-interview. Why? Well, they want to find out what you're going to say. And the number of times with like CBC and BBC and ABC and all of them, every single American channel, all of them. Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. And listen, something else has come up. We're not going to be covering that issue today.
Right. You know,
never once with RT, never once have they done a pre-interview. Have they called me up and said, "Mr. Johnson, we're going to ask you X, Y, and Z. What are you going to say?" Never done that. They let me go on air and I say what I think and believe without any guidance. The same thing happened. I was invited by the Russian UN delegation in April to make a presentation before the UN Security Council. At no point did they call and say, okay, Johnson, we're giving you a chance on this world stage. Here's what you got to say. No, I wrote it, and I submitted it 2 days in advance to be translated. But at no point did they come back and say, "Oh, we're not really comfortable with this phrase," or "We don't like how you..." Didn't say that at all. They let it stand. I got to speak freely, and I'm going, who thought that I'd live long enough to see that the freedom of expression in the media comes from Russia and not the United States?
Yeah.
In the United States, it's suppression. In Russia, it's freedom.
Yeah, Larry, I've been on RT dozens of occasions. I've had exactly the same experience as you. I've interviewed 3 guests. I think Ray McGovern was one of them who have been on RT many times, and they all said exactly the same thing as you. They never did a pre-interview, but they always had that experience, or generally had that experience on U.S. media.
Yeah.
Anyways, the last thing, we're almost at an hour point, so I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I did want to ask you about South Korea before I let
what a clown show that is, huh?
Oh man. So, and I remember I started out this whole interview by asking, is the Biden administration trying to set the world on fire before it leaves office next month? So we've agreed that, the U.S. paws are all over the mess in Syria, that it's all over the mess in Georgia. This one seems a bit murkier to me. So, as I understand it, they're really interested to get your take on this. But South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol suddenly decided earlier this week to declare martial law. And he claimed that, I almost spit my coffee out when I read this, that by imposing martial law, he would, quote, rebuild democracy, close quote, in South Korea. Which sounds to me like saying that I'm going to improve your health by shooting you in the head. But anyways, this plan didn't work out too well. He had a quite vigorous reaction from Parliament. And after a standoff, he rescinded the plan to impose martial law. And now South Korean lawmakers are trying to impeach him. Yeah. What the hell do you think's going on here, Larry? Do you think that the U.S. is somehow behind this plan to impose martial law, or is this completely unrelated to the aspirations of the Biden administration?
Yeah, no, I think this came out of the blue. This caught him by complete surprise. This guy, Suk-yeol, he reminds me of the guy that goes to the Lamborghini dealer and buys a Lamborghini and then realizes, what, I got to make payments on this? What, $10,000 a month? Are you kidding? So here he launches this coup, which is what it was, declared martial law. Oh, and counting, I guess, on the military to come to his side. And the military initially is blocking off the legislature. You're not getting into Parliament. But apparently the legislatures get into Parliament, and let's give Suk his due. I mean, he had a major accomplishment out of this. He got all 190 members of the South Korean Parliament to vote against him. He brought them together. He's a unifier, okay? And think about that. It's amazing. And as soon as all 109, I mean, normally you couldn't even get them to agree that the sun comes up in the east. They'd argue about that. But they all agreed, hey, what this knucklehead did was wrong. And as soon as they voted, the military's out front going, oh, we're out of here. Hey, guys, have a good night, man. They bail. And all of a sudden, Hasuke's going, oh, never mind. I withdraw it.
Right.
Next stop, Impeachment City.
So was he just going off on his own with some crazy lark?
Yeah.
I think that's what it was.
Yeah, it's just, I guess maybe, he'd been watching too many Volodymyr Zelensky videos, saying, geez, Zelensky pulls this stuff up. Maybe I can get away with it too. No.
Right.
Just telling Suk, the only people that can do that are fellows who have accomplished playing a piano with their penis. Until you can do that, you can't try it.
But it's interesting, how the population might perceive this. I wonder if they're going to think the U.S. did have a hand in all of this.
Oh, sure, somewhere or the other. Yeah. And in fact, if I was Suk, I'd come out and say, I didn't want to do it, but Joe Biden made me do it.
Yeah, take the guy who's on the way out the door. You may as well take him out. Throw him under the bus.
He had compromising pictures of me with my dog. Yeah.
All right.
Sorry.
Well, it's okay. Colorful language is welcome here.
Yeah.
In any event, Larry, it's been a great pleasure talking to you. I always learn so much by listening to you speak, and I really appreciate you coming on to our program, and I hope we can do this again in the future.
Hey, Dimitri, it was fun. Thanks for having me.
All right. And this is Dimitri Lascaris for Reason to Resist from Montreal on December 4th, 2024.